The scream tore through the afternoon air like a knife, sharp and terrified, and Nathan Ingram's head snapped up from the fence post he had been securing just as a buggy careened past him on the dusty road. The horse wild-eyed and foaming at the mouth as it thundered toward the rocky ravine that lay just beyond the bend. He did not think, did not hesitate, just vaulted onto his mare and dug his heels in hard, the world blurring around him as he pushed the animal to its limits. The woman in that buggy was screaming herself hoarse, her dark hair whipping around her face, and Nathan could see her hands desperately gripping the sides as the vehicle lurched and bounced over the uneven ground. His heart hammered against his ribs as he leaned low over his mare's neck, urging her faster, the gap between them closing inch by precious inch. The July heat of 1878 bore down on Willits, California with a vengeance, but Nathan felt nothing except the burning need to reach that buggy before it was too late. He had spent 5 years working ranches from Montana to Texas, had seen men die in stampedes and women lose everything to drought and disease, but something about that scream struck him differently, reached into his chest and twisted. He pushed his mare alongside the runaway horse, close enough now to see the sweat streaking its flanks, to hear the woman's ragged breathing between her cries for help. The ravine loomed ahead, maybe 30 seconds away at this speed, and Nathan knew he had one chance. He reached out, fingers stretching toward the bridle, and the buggy jolted hard over a rock, nearly throwing the woman clear out. She screamed again, a sound of pure terror, and Nathan's hand closed around leather. He pulled, his arm screaming with the strain, his mare fighting to keep pace, and for one heart-stopping moment nothing happened. Then the runaway horse began to slow, confused by the pressure on its mouth, and Nathan pulled harder, speaking in a low, firm voice that cut through the chaos. The horse's ears swiveled toward him, and he pulled again, steadier now, and the animal began to respond. 20 feet from the ravine edge, the buggy shuddered to a stop, dust billowing around them in thick clouds. Nathan swung down before his mare had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground hard as he rushed to the buggy. The woman sat frozen, her hands still locked on the sides, her chest heaving with each breath. Her face was pale beneath the dust, her eyes wide and dark, and for a moment they just stared at each other, the enormity of what had almost happened settling over them like a heavy blanket. "You are safe now," Nathan said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You are safe." She blinked, and then her hands began to tremble, the shock finally catching up to her. Nathan reached up without thinking, placing his hands on her waist, and lifted her down from the buggy. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground, and he steadied her, his hands still on her waist, her hands suddenly gripping his arms. "The horse," she managed, her voice shaking. "Something spooked him. A snake, I think. He just bolted, and I could not stop him. I tried, but he would not listen, and I thought I was going to die." "But you did not," Nathan said, and his hands tightened slightly on her waist before he forced himself to step back. "You are here and you are safe." She nodded, and then her eyes filled with tears and she covered her face with her hands. Nathan stood there, awkward and uncertain, before he gently touched her shoulder. "It is over now. You are all right." When she finally lowered her hands, her cheeks were streaked with tears and dust, but she was trying to smile. "Thank you. I do not know how to thank you enough. If you had not been there, if you had not caught up, I would have gone over that edge." Nathan glanced toward the ravine, his jaw tightening at the thought. "Good thing I was close then." She took a shaky breath and wiped at her eyes. "My name is Zara Anderson. My father owns the general store in town. I was on my way back from delivering supplies to the Morrison Ranch when the horse spooked." "Nathan Ingram," he replied. I work for the Patterson Ranch, been there about 2 months now. Zara looked up at him properly then, really looked at him, and Nathan felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, even with dust on her face and tear tracks on her cheeks, with dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. He was suddenly very aware of how rough he must look, 5 days of stubble on his jaw, his shirt dusty and sweat-stained, but she did not seem to mind. She just kept looking at him like he was something remarkable. "I should check your horse," Nathan said, needing to break the moment before it overwhelmed him. "Make sure he is calm enough for you to get back to town." He walked over to the horse, which was now standing with its head down, sides heaving. Nathan ran his hands over the animal's neck, speaking softly, and gradually the horse began to settle. There was no visible injury, no sign of what had caused such a violent reaction except for the fading scent of snake in the air. Nathan checked the harness and found it secure, then led the horse in a slow circle, watching its gait. Everything seemed fine, just a frightened animal that had panicked. "He should be all right now," Nathan said, leading the horse back to the buggy. "But I am going to ride with you back to town, just to make sure he does not bolt again." Zara nodded quickly. "I would appreciate that very much." Nathan tied his mare to the back of the buggy and climbed up beside Zara, taking the reins from her still trembling hands. She did not protest, just settled back against the seat and watched him as he turned the buggy around and started back toward Willits. The afternoon sun beat down on them, and the road stretched out long and dusty ahead. But Nathan found himself hyper-aware of the woman sitting beside him, of the way her shoulder occasionally brushed his when the buggy hit a rough patch, of the way she kept stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. "How long have you been in Willits?" Zara asked after a while, her voice steadier now. 2 months, like I said. I have been working ranches most of my adult life, moving around a lot. Heard the Patterson place needed hands, so I came out here." "Do you like it? The work, I mean." Nathan considered that. "It is good, honest work. The land here is beautiful even if the summer heat tries to kill you. I like the mountains, the way the air smells after it rains. I like that it feels like a place a man could put down roots if he was of a mind to." "And are you of a mind to?" He glanced at her, caught by the genuine curiosity in her voice. "Maybe. I have been drifting a long time. Gets old after a while, never having a place to call home." Zara nodded slowly. "My father came here when I was 12, right after my mother died. He said he needed a fresh start, somewhere we could build a new life. That was 6 years ago, and I cannot imagine living anywhere else now." Nathan did some quick math in his head. That made her 18, a grown woman by any measure, though there was still something young about the wonder in her eyes when she looked out at the landscape. He was 24 himself, old enough to have seen plenty of hard living but young enough to still believe in second chances. "Your father must have been worried when you did not return on time," Nathan said. Zara's eyes widened. "Oh no, I did not even think about that. He is probably worried sick. Can we go a bit faster?" Nathan urged the horse into a quicker trot, keeping a careful eye on the animal's behavior, but it seemed content to obey now. Whatever panic it had felt burned away by the hard run. They made good time, and soon the buildings of Willits came into view. The town small but bustling with the kind of energy that came from people building something new in wild country. The general store was easy to spot. A 2-story building near the center of town with a painted sign that read Anderson's General Store in neat letters. A man came rushing out as they pulled up, his face lined with worry. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and the kind of weathered look that came from years of hard work. "Zara, thank God, I was about to organize a search party. What happened? Why are you so late?" Zara climbed down from the buggy, and her father pulled her into a tight embrace. The horse spooked, father. He ran wild, and I could not stop him. We were heading straight for the ravine near the Morrison turnoff when Mr. Ingram here caught up and got him under control. He saved my life. Her father turned to Nathan, who had climbed down and was unhitching his mare. The older man's eyes were sharp as they assessed him, taking in every detail, and then he strode forward and gripped Nathan's hand in a fierce shake. James Anderson, I owe you a debt I can never repay. My daughter is everything to me. If something had happened to her, his voice broke and he cleared his throat roughly. Thank you for saving her. Any man would have done the same, Nathan said, uncomfortable with the praise but understanding it. But you were the one who did, James said firmly. Please come inside. Let me give you something for your trouble, and you must stay for supper. It is the least I can do. Nathan started to protest, but Zara touched his arm. Please. I would feel better knowing we properly thanked you. There was something in her eyes, a warmth and a hope that made Nathan's resolve crumble. All right. I should send word to the Patterson ranch that I will be late getting back. I will have someone ride out with a message, James said immediately. Come inside, please. The store was well stocked and organized, with everything from canned goods to bolts of fabric to farming equipment. James led them through to the living quarters in the back, a comfortable space with a kitchen and sitting area. He insisted Nathan sit while he poured cold water from a pitcher, and Zara excused herself to wash up and change out of her dusty dress. Nathan found himself alone with James, who was studying him with an expression that was part gratitude and part assessment. You are a ranch hand, Zara said. Yes, sir. Been working for the Patterson place for about 2 months now. Good people, the Pattersons. They treat their workers fair from what I have heard. James paused, then leaned forward slightly. I will be honest with you, Mr. Ingram. My daughter is everything to me. After my wife passed, Zara became my whole world. I have protected her perhaps too much, but after what happened today, I realize I cannot keep her in a bubble. The world is dangerous, and she needs to know there are still good men in it, men who will do the right thing without expecting anything in return. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anyone would do. But you did it without hesitation from what Zara told me. That speaks to character. James sat back, his expression softening. Stay for supper. Get to know us a bit. I think Zara would like that, and I know I would. Before Nathan could respond, Zara returned, wearing a clean blue dress that brought out the color in her dark eyes. Her hair was still damp at the edges, and she had scrubbed the dust from her face, revealing smooth skin and a natural beauty that made Nathan's breath catch. She smiled at him, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and Nathan felt something in his chest tighten and release all at once. Supper was simple but delicious. Beef stew with fresh bread, and the conversation flowed easily. James told stories about establishing the store, about the early days of Willits when it was barely more than a few buildings and a dream. Zara talked about helping in the store, about the customers who had become friends, about her love for the mountains that surrounded the town. Nathan found himself sharing more than he usually did, talking about his years on various ranches, about the places he had seen and the hard lessons he had learned. When the meal was finished and Nathan finally rose to leave, Zara walked him to the door. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had finally begun to cool. Nathan untied his mare and turned to find Zara watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Thank you again, she said softly. I know I keep saying it, but I need you to understand how grateful I am. You did not have to risk yourself for me, but you did. I could not have lived with myself if I had not tried, Nathan said honestly. and I am glad I was able to reach you in time." Zara stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of lavender soap on her skin. "Will I see you again?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Nathan knew he should say something non-committal, should protect them both from expectations that might not be met, but when he looked into her eyes, he found he could not lie to her. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much." Her smile was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. "Then come by the store when you have time. We are open every day except Sunday." Nathan nodded, mounted his mare, and rode out of town with his heart beating faster than it had even during the rescue. Behind him, Zara stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared from sight, one hand pressed to her chest as if trying to hold something precious inside. The days that followed were torture and anticipation mixed together. Nathan threw himself into his work at the Patterson Ranch, mending fences and breaking horses, and doing all the 1,000 tasks that ranch life demanded. But his mind kept drifting back to Willits, to a general store and the woman who had looked at him like he was a hero. He told himself he was being foolish, that one dramatic meeting did not mean anything, but he could not shake the memory of Zara's smile or the way his name had sounded in her voice. On Saturday, Nathan rode into town with his week's wages in his pocket and a nervous energy thrumming through his veins. He told himself he needed supplies, that it was perfectly reasonable to visit the general store, but he knew he was fooling no one, least of all himself. When he pushed open the door, a bell chimed overhead, and Zara looked up from where she was helping an older woman select fabric. Her face transformed when she saw him, her professional smile becoming something real and warm. "Mr. Ingram," she said, and there was delight in her voice. "How good to see you." "Miss Anderson," Nathan replied, suddenly feeling awkward and out of place in his work clothes. "I was needing some supplies." "Of course. Let me just finish helping Mrs. Chen and I will be right with you." Nathan browsed the store, not really seeing anything until Zara appeared at his elbow. She was wearing a green dress today, and her hair was pulled back in a practical braid, but she was no less beautiful than he remembered. "So, what do you need?" she asked, her eyes dancing with amusement as if she knew exactly why he was really there. "Tobacco," Nathan said, grabbing at the first thing he could think of, "and maybe some coffee. And I should look at shirts, mine are getting pretty worn." Zara gathered the tobacco and coffee, then led him to the clothing section. She pulled out several shirts, holding them up against his chest to check the size, and Nathan stood very still, intensely aware of her nearness, of her fingers brushing against his chest through the fabric. She seemed to take longer than strictly necessary, and when their eyes met, he saw color rise in her cheeks. "This one would suit you," she said softly, holding up a dark blue shirt. "It would bring out your eyes." "I will take it," Nathan said, not caring what it cost. She wrapped his purchases in brown paper and tied them with string, her movements efficient but somehow reluctant, as if she did not want him to leave. Nathan paid, counting out coins carefully, and then stood there holding his package like a fool because he could not think of any reason to stay longer. "There is a dance next Saturday," Zara said suddenly, not meeting his eyes. "At the town hall. Most everyone goes." "It is one of the few social events we have out here." Nathan's heart kicked up. "Is that so?" "Yes. It starts at 7 and usually goes late. There will be music and food, and it is a good time." She paused, then looked up at him through her lashes. "I will be there." "Then I will be there too," Nathan said. And the smile she gave him made him feel like he could conquer the world. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Nathan endured good-natured ribbing from the other ranch hands when they found out he was going to the dance, but he did not care. He spent an embarrassing amount of time on Saturday afternoon washing up, shaving carefully, and putting on the new blue shirt Zara had picked out for him. When he rode into Willits that evening, the sun was just beginning to set, and he could already hear music drifting from the town hall. Inside, lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd. There were families and couples, old-timers and young folk, all dressed in their finest. Nathan stood near the door, suddenly uncertain until he spotted Zara across the room. She was wearing a dress the color of deep wine, her hair done up in soft curls, and she was absolutely breathtaking. When she saw him, her whole face lit up, and she excused herself from the women she had been talking with and made her way toward him. "You came," she said, and there was relief in her voice as if she had been afraid he might not. "I said I would," Nathan replied. "Would you like to dance?" Nathan hesitated. "I should warn you, I am not much of a dancer. Ranch life does not exactly provide a lot of opportunities to learn." Zara laughed, a sound like bells, and took his hand. "Then I will teach you. Come on." She led him onto the floor as a new song started, something slow and sweet. Zara placed his hand on her waist and took his other hand in hers, and then she began to move, guiding him through the steps. Nathan stumbled at first, too focused on his feet, but Zara just smiled up at him encouragingly. "Stop thinking so hard," she murmured. "Just feel the music and follow me." He tried, and gradually it began to work. They moved together, closer than propriety strictly allowed, and Nathan found he did not care what anyone else thought. All that mattered was Zara in his arms, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she looked at him like he was the only person in the room. "Tell me something about yourself," Zara said as they swayed. "Something you have never told anyone else." Nathan thought about that. "Sometimes late at night when I am alone under the stars, I wonder what my life would have been like if my parents had not died when I was young. If I had grown up in a real home instead of being passed from ranch to ranch, working for my keep. I wonder if I would have been different, softer maybe, or if the hard parts are just who I am." Zara's expression grew tender. "I think the hard parts made you strong, but I do not think they made you hard. You risked yourself for a stranger, Nathan. That is not something a hard man does." "Your turn," Nathan said, not wanting to dwell on his past. "Tell me something true." Zara bit her lip, then seemed to make a decision. "I have been lonely. My father loves me, I know that, but he has been so focused on the store, on building security for us, that I think he forgot I needed more than just safety. I have friends here, good people, but I have never felt truly seen by anyone until you looked at me that day on the road. When you steadied me after lifting me from the buggy, when your hands were on my waist, I felt something I had never felt before, and it scared me and thrilled me all at once." Nathan's hand tightened on her waist. "I felt it too. I have been trying to tell myself it was just the drama of the moment, the fear and the relief all mixed together, but I know it was not. When I saw you in the store, it was still there, that feeling." "What do we do about it?" Zara whispered. "I would like to court you properly," Nathan said, his voice low and intense. "If you are willing, and if your father will allow it. I do not have much to offer right now, just my wages and my word, but I am a hard worker and I have been saving money. I could build something here, make a real life instead of drifting." Zara's eyes shone with unshed tears, but she was smiling. "I would like that very much." They danced through 3 more songs before James Anderson appeared at Nathan's elbow. "Mind if I steal my daughter for a dance?" he asked, but his eyes were knowing and not unkind. "Of course, sir," Nathan said, reluctantly releasing Zara. He watched them move onto the floor, saw James speaking seriously to his daughter, saw the way Zara's face grew animated as she responded. Then James looked over at Nathan, and after a long moment, he nodded slowly. When the dance ended, James brought Zara back to Nathan. "My daughter tells me you wish to court her," James said without preamble. "Yes, sir. I know I am just a ranch hand right now, but I am honest and hardworking, and I would treat her with the respect she deserves." James studied him for a long moment. "I have been asking around about you this week. The Pattersons speak highly of your work and your character. Several people mentioned you are reliable and decent. That matters to me." He paused. "I lost my wife to fever, and I nearly lost my daughter last week. Life is short and unpredictable, and I would rather see Zara happy with a good man than safe and lonely. You have my permission to court her, but I expect you to do it properly. No being alone in places that would compromise her reputation." "I understand, sir. Thank you." James nodded and moved away, and Zara grabbed Nathan's hand. "Come outside for a moment. I need some air, and we can still see everyone from the porch, so it is perfectly proper." They stepped out into the cool evening air, and Zara turned to him, her face glowing with happiness. "I cannot believe this is happening. A week ago, I did not even know you existed, and now everything has changed." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Nathan asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "The best thing," Zara said fervently. "I have watched other girls my age get courted and married, and I always wondered if I would ever feel what they seem to feel. Now I know I was just waiting for the right person." Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and Zara leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed for a moment. "I will do right by you," Nathan promised. "I swear it." "I know you will," Zara said, opening her eyes. "That is why I am not afraid." They stayed outside for a little while longer, talking softly about everything and nothing, before propriety demanded they return inside. Nathan danced with Zara twice more before the evening ended, and when he finally rode back to the ranch late that night, his heart was so full he thought it might burst. The courtship that followed was the sweetest torture Nathan had ever known. He rode into town every Saturday after collecting his wages, and every Saturday he and Zara would spend time together, always properly chaperoned but finding ways to create small moments of intimacy anyway. They would walk through town with James trailing discreetly behind, and Zara would take Nathan's arm and lean close to point out things of interest. They would sit on the porch of the general store in the evenings, with James reading inside but the door left open, and they would talk for hours about their dreams and fears and hopes. Nathan learned that Zara loved to read, and that her favorite time of day was early morning when the world was still quiet. She learned that Nathan had a gift with horses, and that he dreamed of having his own ranch someday, a place where he could build something lasting. They shared their pasts, the painful and the joyful, and with each revelation they grew closer, the bond between them strengthening. 3 months into their courtship, Nathan realized he was in love. It was not a sudden thing, but a gradual certainty that had been building with every smile, every touch, every conversation. Zara was everything he had not known he was looking for, bright and kind and strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. She saw him, really saw him, and she loved what she found. He was fairly certain she loved him too, though neither of them had said the words yet. He could see it in the way her face lit up when he rode into town, in the way she always found excuses to touch him, casual brushes of her hand against his arm, in the way she looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention. It was in the way she had begun to plan for a future that included him without even realizing she was doing it, talking about things they would do together, places they would go. Nathan began to save every penny he could, cutting his expenses to the bone. He had a goal now, a purpose beyond just surviving to the next day. He wanted to be able to offer Zara a real life, and that meant he needed his own land, his own home. He spoke to the Pattersons about his plans, and they were supportive, even giving him extra work when they could to help him save faster. 6 months after they began courting, Nathan knew it was time. He had enough saved for a small piece of land on the outskirts of Willits, nothing fancy but with good water and enough grazing for a modest herd. He had spoken to the land office and made arrangements to purchase it. And now, all that remained was asking the most important question of his life. He rode into town on a Saturday afternoon in late January 1879, his heart hammering with nerves. He found James in the store and asked if he could speak with him privately. They went into the back room, and Nathan faced the older man with as much confidence as he could muster. "Mr. Anderson, I have come to ask your permission to marry Zara. I know I am not rich, and I am still just getting started building something of my own, but I love your daughter with everything I am. I will spend my life making sure she is happy and cared for, and I will never give her cause to regret choosing me." James looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, slow and warm. "I have been expecting this conversation for a while now. I see the way you two look at each other, and it reminds me of how I felt about my wife. You have my blessing, Nathan. Take care of my girl and we will have no problems." Relief flooded through Nathan, so intense it almost made him dizzy. "Thank you, sir. I will make you proud." "I know you will. Now go ask her properly. She is in the front, organizing inventory." Nathan found Zara counting jars of preserves, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she saw him, her face smoothed into a smile. "You are early today. I did not expect you for another hour at least." "I needed to talk to you," Nathan said, and something in his voice made her set down the jar she was holding and give him her full attention. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" "Well, as privately as is proper," he added. Zara's eyes widened, but she nodded and led him out to the porch. The street was busy with Saturday shoppers, so they were hardly alone, but it was as private as they could manage. Zara turned to him, her hands clasped in front of her, and waited. Nathan took a breath, then took her hands in his. "Zara, 6 months ago, I saved you from a runaway buggy, and you saved me right back from a life of just existing without really living. You have given me purpose and joy, and a reason to dream about the future. I have bought a piece of land just outside town, and I am going to build a house on it, a real home, but it will not mean anything if I am there alone." Zara's breath caught, and her eyes filled with tears. "I love you," Nathan continued, his voice strong and sure. "I love your kindness and your strength, your laugh and the way you see the best in people. I love how you make me want to be better, to build something lasting and good. Zara Anderson, will you marry me?" "Yes," Zara said immediately, and then she was crying and laughing all at once. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Nathan. I think I have loved you since you lifted me down from that buggy and made me feel safe for the first time in so long." Nathan pulled her into his arms, propriety be damned, and held her close. He could feel her heart racing against his chest, could feel her arms tight around his waist, and he knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all his life. James appeared in the doorway, grinning broadly. "I take it she said yes." "She did," Nathan said, not releasing Zara. "Then we should celebrate. Come inside and I will open the good bottle I have been saving." The wedding was planned for April, when the weather would be mild and the wildflowers would be blooming in the hills. Nathan threw himself into building their house, working every spare moment he had. It was not large, just 3 rooms to start, but it was solid and well made, with a good stone fireplace and windows that let in plenty of light. He built the bed frame himself, carved their initials into the headboard where only they would see it. Zara came to see the progress whenever she could, always with her father or another chaperone, and she would walk through the space imagining how they would arrange the furniture, what curtains she would make for the windows, where they would sit together in the evenings. Every visit ended with them standing close together, holding hands and talking about the life they would build. The months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Zara sewed her wedding dress with help from the other women in town, simple but beautiful in cream-colored silk. Nathan bought a new suit and actually learned to tie a proper necktie. They met with the pastor, discussed plans for the ceremony and their future, and every conversation just reinforced what they already knew: they were meant for this, meant for each other. The night before the wedding, Nathan lay awake in the bunkhouse at the Patterson Ranch, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow his life would change forever, and he was not nervous, just filled with a sense of rightness. He had been drifting for so long, never quite belonging anywhere, and now he was going to bind himself to Zara and build roots so deep nothing could tear them loose. It felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the sky a perfect blue. The ceremony was held at the small church in Willits, and it seemed like the entire town had turned out to witness it. Nathan stood at the front of the church in his new suit, his hands clasped behind his back to keep them from shaking, and waited for his bride. When Zara appeared at the back of the church on her father's arm, Nathan's breath stopped. She was radiant, her dark hair swept up with small white flowers tucked into the curls, her dress simple but perfect, her eyes locked on his with such love and trust that he felt humbled by it. James walked her down the aisle, and when he placed her hand in Nathan's, the older man's eyes were wet. "Take care of each other," James whispered, and then he stepped back. The ceremony itself was a blur for Nathan. He heard himself saying his vows, heard Zara speaking hers in a clear, strong voice, felt the cool metal of the ring as he slipped it onto her finger. And then the pastor was pronouncing them man and wife, and he was allowed to kiss his bride, and when their lips met, it felt like a promise sealed, a future beginning. The celebration afterward was joyful and raucous, with food and music and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Nathan danced with Zara over and over, holding her close, and he could not stop smiling. She was his wife now, his partner, the other half of his heart, and he could barely believe his good fortune. As the evening wound down, Nathan and Zara slipped away from the celebration and rode out to their new home in a small wagon filled with wedding gifts and Zara's belongings. The house looked welcoming in the moonlight, and Nathan lifted Zara down from the wagon, and then, in a gesture that made her laugh with delight, swept her up into his arms and carried her across the threshold. Inside, he set her down gently, and they stood there in the main room, suddenly shy with each other despite all the months of courtship. Nathan lit the lamps, and warm light filled the space. Zara walked slowly through the house, touching things, claiming it as her own, and then she turned back to him with such love in her eyes that he felt it like a physical force. "I am so happy," she whispered. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy." Nathan crossed to her and took her hands. "Neither did I, but we are going to be happy together for the rest of our lives, Zara, I promise you that." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his jaw. "I know, and I promise you the same. No matter what comes, we will face it together." They came together then, a kiss that was different from any they had shared before, deeper and full of promise. Nathan picked her up again and carried her to their bedroom, to the bed he had built with his own hands, and they began their married life together with tenderness and passion and joy. The months that followed were the happiest of Nathan's life. He worked the Patterson ranch during the day and came home to Zara every evening, and she always greeted him with a kiss and a smile that made every hour of hard labor worthwhile. They worked together to build up their small property, planting a garden, acquiring a few chickens, planning for the future when they could afford cattle of their own. Zara continued to help at her father's store a few days a week, and the rest of the time she focused on making their house a home. She sewed curtains and quilts, learned to cook on the fireplace, and filled the space with warmth and laughter. Nathan discovered he loved coming home to the smell of baking bread, to finding Zara humming as she worked, to the simple domestic joy of sitting together in the evenings and talking about their day. In September, Zara told Nathan she was expecting their first child. He was so overwhelmed with emotion that he could not speak for a moment, just pulled her into his arms and held her tight. A baby, a family of their own, the dreams they had talked about now becoming reality. He became even more protective of her, insisting she not overwork herself, and Zara tolerated his hovering with patient amusement. As winter approached and Zara's belly began to swell with their child, Nathan found himself overwhelmed with gratitude for the path his life had taken. If that horse had not bolted, if he had not been in the right place at the right time, he might never have met Zara. He might still be drifting, alone and aimless. Instead, he had a wife he loved beyond measure, a home and a child on the way. He had put down roots so deep they would never be torn loose. The baby came in late March of 1880, a son they named Thomas after Nathan's father. The labor was long and difficult, and Nathan wore a path in the floorboards pacing while the midwife worked with Zara in the bedroom. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and healthy, he nearly collapsed with relief. The midwife let him in a few minutes later, and he found Zara propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said softly, and Nathan approached on shaky legs. The baby was impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and a scrunched-up red face. Nathan reached out with one finger and touched the tiny hand, and immediately the baby's fingers closed around his, gripping tight. Something in Nathan's chest cracked open, a well of love so deep it almost frightened him. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "You are both perfect." Zara smiled up at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "We made him together, you and I. He is the proof of our love." Nathan bent and kissed her forehead, then carefully, so carefully, took his son into his arms. Thomas made a small sound and settled, and Nathan felt complete in a way he never had before. This was what he had been missing all those years of drifting, not just a place to belong but people to belong with, to love and protect and build a life around. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily, and Nathan saved enough to buy a small herd of cattle and begin building his operation. Zara was a partner in every sense, managing the household and helping with the accounts, raising Thomas with patience and love. Their son grew strong and curious, and Nathan taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, just as someone had done for him long ago. In 1882, they had a daughter, Emily, who came into the world easier than her brother had and immediately wrapped both parents around her tiny finger. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Nathan and Zara would watch their children play together and marvel at what they had created. James remained a constant presence in their lives, doting on his grandchildren, and still running the general store with the same dedication he always had. He had aged well, the worry lines that had creased his face when Zara was younger smoothing out now that he could see she was happy and cared for. He often told Nathan that saving Zara that day had been a gift to the whole family, and Nathan always demurred, saying he was the one who had received the gift. In 1884, another son arrived named Samuel, and their little house suddenly felt very full. Nathan began making plans to add on, to build more bedrooms and a larger main room where the family could gather. He worked on it in the evenings and on Sundays after church, and Zara would bring the children out to watch, and they would all pitch in small ways, even little Emily handing him nails with great seriousness. The expanded house was finished by the spring of 1885, and they celebrated with a party that included half the town. Nathan stood in the new main room, watching his children chase each other around while Zara laughed with friends and felt a peace so profound, it brought tears to his eyes. This was success, he thought. Not wealth or fame, but this family, community, love, and a place to call home. As the years passed, Nathan's small ranch grew into a thriving operation. Thomas grew into a serious young man who loved the land as much as his father did, and Emily became a bright, spirited girl who could rope a calf as well as any of the ranch hands. Samuel was still young but already showing signs of his father's gift with horses. Zara aged gracefully, laugh lines appearing at the corners of her eyes, her beauty deepening rather than fading. In the summer of 1890, 12 years after that fateful day when a runaway buggy had changed both their lives forever, Nathan and Zara stood on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. The children were inside doing their evening chores, their voices drifting out through the open windows, and the air smelled of grass and wildflowers. "You ever think about that day?" Zara asked, leaning against Nathan's side. "The day we met, all the time," Nathan admitted. "I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had been working a different section of fence, if I had not heard you scream, if the horse had been just a little bit faster. But none of those things happened," Zara interrupted gently. "You did hear me, and you did save me, and we found each other. That is what matters." Nathan wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "You saved me right back, you know. I was just drifting before I met you, no purpose, no direction. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. We built it together," Zara corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are, we made it together." She was right, Nathan knew. The life they had created was a partnership in the truest sense. Through good years and bad, through the births of their children and the inevitable struggles of ranch life, they had faced everything side by side. The love he had felt for her that day when she said yes to his proposal had only grown deeper and stronger with time, tempered by shared experience and commitment. "I love you," Nathan said, the words as true now as they had been the day he first spoke them. "More than I did yesterday, less than I will tomorrow." Zara turned in his arms and kissed him, and it was sweet and familiar and still thrilling after all these years. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too. For the rest of our lives and whatever comes after." They stood there together as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from it. Inside, their children laughed and called for them, and in a moment they would go in and join them for the evening meal. But for now, they simply held each other and watched the night arrive, grateful beyond words for the life they shared. The ranch continued to prosper, and as Thomas grew into his late teens, he began to take on more responsibility, learning the business from his father with eager dedication. Emily, at 14, was already turning heads in town, though Nathan was not quite ready to acknowledge that his little girl was growing up. Samuel, at 10, was his mother's shadow, helping her in the garden and with the household accounts, showing an aptitude for numbers that surprised them all. In 1892, tragedy struck when James Anderson fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the doctor's best efforts, he did not recover, and he passed away peacefully with Zara holding one hand and Nathan holding the other. His last words were to thank Nathan for taking care of his daughter and to tell Zara how proud he was of the life she had built. They buried him in the Willits Cemetery, and half the town turned out to mourn a man who had been a pillar of the community. Zara grieved deeply, but found comfort in her family, and in the knowledge that her father had died knowing she was happy and loved. They inherited the general store, and after much discussion, decided to let Thomas run it once he was a bit older, giving him a start in business while Nathan and Samuel continued to manage the ranch. Emily declared she wanted to be a teacher, and Nathan and Zara supported her dream, knowing their daughter had the intelligence and compassion to excel at it. As the 1890s progressed, Willits grew from a small frontier town into a proper community with a school, a doctor's office, and even plans for a railroad spur. Nathan served on the town council, using his voice to advocate for the kinds of improvements that would help families like his. Zara became involved in the church, organizing charity drives and supporting families in need, and together they became respected members of the community, known for their fairness and generosity. In the spring of 1895, Thomas married a young woman named Sarah who had moved to Willits with her family 2 years earlier. Nathan walked the young couple through the process of taking over the general store, and he felt immense pride watching his son step into the role James had once filled. Thomas and Sarah moved into the living quarters behind the store, and within a year, they made Nathan and Zara grandparents when their first grandchild, a girl named Grace, was born. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Nathan was struck by the passage of time and the continuity of family. This tiny baby was the future, part of a chain that stretched back through him and Zara, through James and his late wife, through Nathan's own parents who he barely remembered. She was the reason he had worked so hard to build something lasting, so that there would be something to pass on, a legacy of love and hard work and community. Emily left for Teachers College in San Francisco in 1896, and while Nathan missed her terribly, he was bursting with pride at her determination to follow her dreams. She wrote letters home regularly, full of details about her studies and the exciting, modern city, and Nathan read them aloud to Zara in the evenings, both of them marveling at how different their daughter's experiences were from their own youth. Samuel, now 16, had become Nathan's right hand on the ranch, and father and son worked side by side with an easy rhythm born of years of partnership. Samuel had Nathan's quiet competence and Zara's quick mind, and Nathan knew the ranch would be in good hands when he eventually passed it on. In the summer of 1898, 20 years after that fateful rescue, Nathan and Zara renewed their wedding vows in a ceremony at the church. It was Zara's idea, a way to celebrate the life they had built and recommit to each other in front of their family and friends. All 3 of their children were there, along with little Grace and Sarah, and the church was packed with people whose lives had been touched by the couple in one way or another. As Nathan spoke his vows again, looking into Zara's still beautiful face, he felt the same rush of love and commitment he had felt on their wedding day. The years had been kind to them in the ways that mattered. They had built a successful ranch, raised good children, contributed to their community, and through it all, they had loved each other fiercely and faithfully. Their hair might be graying and their bodies bearing the marks of decades of hard work, but the connection between them was as strong as ever. The celebration afterward was joyous, with their children giving speeches that made both Nathan and Zara cry happy tears. Thomas talked about the example his parents had set, showing him what a real marriage looked like. Emily, home from college for the summer, spoke about her mother's strength and her father's kindness, and how she hoped to find a love like theirs someday. Samuel, usually quiet, surprised everyone with an eloquent speech about how his parents had taught him that the greatest success in life was not measured in money or land, but in the love you shared and the people you raised. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Nathan and Zara found themselves alone on their porch once again, a position that had become a kind of ritual over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by the modest glow of the town's lights, and the air was warm with summer. 20 years, Zara said, shaking her head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you were pulling me from that buggy, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Nathan said, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. Every day with you feels new, but I cannot remember a time when you were not part of my life. You have become part of who I am. And you are part of me, Zara replied. The best part. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch cattle lowing softly, the whisper of wind through the grass, the distant call of an owl. It was the sound of home, of a life well lived and still unfolding. As the new century approached, Nathan and Zara found themselves increasingly in the role of family elders. Thomas and Sarah had 3 children now, and Emily had returned from college and married a young lawyer from Sacramento, bringing him back to Willits where he opened a practice. Samuel was courting a rancher's daughter from the next county, and Nathan suspected a wedding announcement was not far off. The ranch was doing better than Nathan had ever dreamed possible during those early years when he was scrimping and saving to buy his first piece of land. They had expanded several times, now running a substantial herd and employing several full-time ranch hands. The house had been expanded again to accommodate visiting grandchildren, and the place was often filled with the sounds of young voices and laughter. On New Year's Eve 1899, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Nathan and Zara hosted a gathering for their entire extended family. All their children were there with their spouses and children, and the house was bursting with warmth and love and noise. As midnight approached, everyone gathered in the main room, and Nathan found himself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. 21 years ago, he had been a drifter with no real home and no prospects beyond the next day's work. Now he was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren who carried his name and his values forward into the future. He had built something that would last beyond his own life, created a legacy that had nothing to do with wealth or fame and everything to do with love and commitment, and doing right by the people who depended on him. As the clock struck midnight and the family cheered and embraced, Nathan pulled Zara close and kissed her soundly, not caring that their children groaned good-naturedly at the display. She was his wife, his partner, the love of his life, and he would never stop being grateful that a runaway buggy had brought them together all those years ago. The new century brought changes, as change was inevitable. Thomas expanded the general store, adding a small restaurant that Sarah managed with skill and warmth. Emily and her husband had 2 children and were pillars of the community, with Emily teaching at the school and her husband handling legal matters for half the families in the area. Samuel married his sweetheart in 1901 and brought her to live on the ranch, where they worked alongside Nathan and gradually took over more of the day-to-day operations. Nathan and Zara, now in their mid-40s, found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took rides out to their favorite spots in the hills, revisiting places that held special memories. They spent evenings on the porch reading to each other from books and newspapers, discussing the changing world and how different things were from when they were young. In 1905, Nathan finally agreed to step back from the most physically demanding ranch work, acknowledging that his body was not what it once had been. Samuel officially took over as the primary manager, though Nathan remained involved in major decisions and was always available for advice. It was strange at first, letting go of work that had defined him for so long, but he discovered he enjoyed the slightly slower pace, enjoyed having time to watch his grandchildren grow, to work on projects around the house, to simply be with Zara. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909 with another big family gathering. The house was filled with children and grandchildren. They now had 8 grandchildren in total, ranging from Grace, who was 14, down to Samuel's youngest, who was just 6 months old. Looking around at the family they had created, Nathan felt a profound sense of completion, as if everything he had been through in his life had been leading to this. That evening, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet again, Nathan and Zara lay in bed together, her head resting on his shoulder as it had for 30 years. "We did good, didn't we?" Nathan said softly into the darkness. "We did," Zara agreed. "We built something beautiful." "I love you," Nathan said, the words as necessary and natural as breathing. "Thank you for saying yes all those years ago, for taking a chance on a ranch hand with more dreams than sense." Zara propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight coming through the window. "You were never just a ranch hand, Nathan. You were the man who saved my life and then spent every day after making that life worth living. Saying yes to you was the easiest decision I ever made." She kissed him then, tender and sweet, and Nathan wrapped his arms around her and held her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. This, he thought, this was what happiness felt like. Not the excitement of new love, though they had had that too, but the deep contentment of knowing you were exactly where you belonged with exactly the right person. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that were part of any life. They lost friends to age and illness, saw their grandchildren grow into young adults, welcomed more great-grandchildren into the family. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and Thomas's store remained a central part of Willits's business community. Emily's children grew up and started families of their own, and suddenly, Nathan and Zara found themselves great-grandparents, a development that made them both laugh and shake their heads in amazement. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, the anchor that kept them grounded through every storm. They had their disagreements over the years, as any couple did, but they always talked things through, always remembered the commitment they had made to each other. The love that had sparked into being on a dusty road in 1878 had matured into something deeper and more resilient, a bond that had been tested by time and found unbreakable. In the summer of 1918, as the world was convulsing with war and change, Nathan and Zara celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. They were both in their early 60s now, their hair mostly gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life fully lived. They celebrated quietly this time, just the two of them and their immediate family, a small gathering on the porch of the house Nathan had built with his own hands 4 decades earlier. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nathan took Zara's hand and led her out to the spot where they had stood so many times over the years. The land stretched out before them, familiar and beloved, marked by fences they had built and trees they had planted and memories they had made. 40 years, Nathan said, shaking his head. Sometimes I still cannot believe we have had 40 years together. And hopefully many more, Zara said, squeezing his hand. God willing, Nathan agreed. But even if we only had right now, this moment, it would be enough. You have given me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. We gave each other that life, Zara corrected gently, as she always did. It was always us, Nathan. From that very first moment, it was us. Nathan pulled her close, and they stood there as the light faded and the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would carry on, and their children's children, each generation building on the foundation of love and commitment that Nathan and Zara had laid down all those years ago. In that moment, standing on the land they had made their own with the woman he loved more than his own life, Nathan knew with absolute certainty that every choice he had made, every hardship he had endured, every mile he had drifted before finding Willits had been worth it. Because all of it had led him here, to this place, to this woman, to this life. And it was good. It was more than good. It was everything. The years stretched on, and Nathan and Zara aged gracefully together, their love a beacon for the entire family. They remained active in the community as long as they were able, attending church services and town gatherings, always greeted with warmth and respect. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a tale of courage and fate and love at first sight. When they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, the celebration was massive, with family coming from all over California and beyond to honor the couple. Nathan and Zara stood before their assembled descendants' children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren, and renewed their vows one final time. Nathan's voice was still strong despite his years, and when he promised to love Zara for whatever time they had remaining, there was not a dry eye in the house. They lived out their remaining years in the house Nathan had built, surrounded by love and family, their days quiet but content. And when the time came, first for Nathan and then, a short year later, for Zara, they slipped away peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had lived fully and loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations. They were buried side by side in the Willits Cemetery under a simple headstone that read, Nathan Ingram, 1854-1933, and Zara Ingram, 1860-1934. Beloved husband and wife together forever. And beneath that, added by their children, he saved her life and she gave him a reason to live it. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, and the story of the cowboy who heard a woman screaming as her buggy ran wild, who caught up and brought the horse under control, and who found love in the aftermath of near tragedy, became a treasured part of family history, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come when you least expect them, and that true love, once found, endures forever.